I don't usually have trigger warnings in these videos, but I think it's important to warn you ahead of time that this video contains music theory terminology and pedantic online debate, which I guess I didn't need to say since I already brought up the music theory, but viewer discretion is still advised. Rick Beato is a popular yet controversial YouTuber in the field of music analysis. He's been criticized numerous times for his out-of-touch views on things like auto-tune and musical simplicity, and unless you follow him, is only really in the outside public eye when there's backlash to one of his unpopular opinions. One of Beato's more beloved series is called What Makes This Song Great, where he analyzes the music theory behind classic rock and pop songs to showcase their excellence. Usually I'm not the kind of person who thinks you can quantify a song's quality through the individual music theory ideas it has alone, and often videos like this fall into the trap of just saying a song is good because it's complicated musically, but Beato is an interesting person to hear talk about his craft, and this series is a good watch if you want to learn about the ideas behind a lot of popular songs. Inspired by these videos, another man named Pat Finnerty created a new series in February of 2021 called What Makes This Song Stink, which has the same concept but instead shows why a song is of poor quality. As someone who enjoys watching videos of people comedically criticizing bad music and recognize the episode topics as songs I agreed were bad, I was excited when I first discovered Finnerty's videos. And after watching through the whole series, I can safely say these episodes definitely hold up as interesting and entertaining pieces of music criticism, even if it does have some problems we'll get into later. But as I watched through the series, I kept thinking back to the first episode, which talks about the song Kryptonite by the band 3 Doors Down. Maybe it's just because it's the first one Pat made, so there's bound to be some issues that needed ironing out, but I realized that the arguments he's making here don't really hold up to much scrutiny when you try and think about them. I definitely agreed with him that Kryptonite is a bad song, but the way he tries to articulate and elaborate on why parts of the song are bad leaves a lot to be desired. But to be perfectly fair, all the other videos in this series don't have the issues I'm about to explain, or at least to the degree seen in this episode, but I also haven't seen Pat indicate anywhere that he regrets this video, so I'm assuming he still stands by it despite it being this rough. And also, I do understand this series is more focused on setting up jokes at the song's expense than anything else, but it does still make an effort to have real analysis of the songs it talks about, so if that's what all the jokes are founded upon, I would prefer that analysis to be good and well established. Since I haven't seen anyone point out these flaws, which I'm guessing is because the people watching the video already don't need much convincing in order to hate the song, I want to try to explain the flaws in the way Pat argues against Kryptonite's quality, and maybe uncover a more general flaw with the show's presentation style. This isn't coming from an expert in music theory, or production or criticism, or even from a fan of 3 Doors Down, but from someone who understands enough to tell that his commentary is often lackluster. So I figured I could go through the video with you all today and try to dissect where Pat Finnerty goes wrong in establishing what makes this song stink. The first batch of criticisms he has with Kryptonite are with the guitar part in the song's intro. He points out that the chords in the intro are a pretty simple 3-chord loop, and specifically brings up that the A chord in this loop is a suspended chord, which is easier to play on a guitar.
It's B minor, G, and A. Thing is that it's not even an A in this song, it's an A sus. Why I'm telling you that is because A, you have to push down 3 fingers, but A sus, you only have to push down 2. That makes it even easier for these guys to play this.
This is meant as a point towards the song being simplistic, and to imply that the people making the song are lazy, though he quickly clarifies this point by saying this.
I don't need it to be yes for a song to be good. I love rock and roll, man. I love simple shit.
I think it's weird that this statement is missing the second half, where you would explain why what you're talking about is an exception to the more general opinion you're clarifying that you have. That's probably more to do with the video not being prepared that well in advance, but spoiler alert, a lot of the issues with Kryptonite involve it being a simplistic song, so this quote might bite Pat in the ass later on. To play devil's advocate for a second, or I guess 40 minutes, I'd argue that despite a suspended A chord being easier to play than a normal A chord musically speaking, and in this context, it's more interesting and complex of a chord than most people would expect from a pop rock song like this. Not by much, mind you, but raising the third of a chord by a semitone, therefore letting it clash with the fifth to give it more tension, is a simple addition that gives the music theory of the song more character than it just being a normal A chord, especially in an often simplistic subgenre like this. Showing that the chord is easier to play, and implying that this was chosen because the guitarist was lazy and wanted to put 2 fingers on the guitar instead of 3 out of sheer apathy is very presumptuous, as it could have easily just been a suspended chord sounded better to them or something. Even if as a whole Kryptonite is absolutely a half-baked song, pointing out this one chord isn't the way to illustrate that, and the fact that a song is lazy doesn't mean that every decision made in the song's creation was done out of laziness. He then shows us that instead of just playing the notes of a chord all at once, they play each note individually in ascending or descending order, a music idea called an arpeggio for those unaware.
The second thing you learn how to do when you play guitar is first you strum a chord, and then you're like, hey, I can pick each one of these individually.
Yes, Pat, one of the first things you do learn when playing guitar is how to play notes on a guitar. Very good. He then notes, you get it? Like notes, like music, that this arpeggiated guitar bit sounds a lot like a few other popular songs. First by calling this intro an upside down and lesser version of White Wedding by Billy Idol.
Kryptonite is like the bizarro world, terrible, shitty reverse White Wedding.
White Wedding is definitely a better song than Kryptonite, so this is a funny observation, although the comparison is between these specific segments of the intro guitar riff and not the songs as a whole, so the humor doesn't really land because, unlike overall song quality, how comparatively good the 2-second intro parts that arpeggiate the notes of a B minor chord are not as obvious. Pat hasn't demonstrated what White Wedding does well with its guitar part that Kryptonite is getting wrong, other than it being a good song while Kryptonite isn't, and literally just saying,
so, that stinks.
He also compares the intro to House of the Rising Sun by the Animals, Californication by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and Mother by Danzig, again to imply that the guitarist was lazy. He compares it to House of the Rising Sun as another example of a better song with an arpeggiated intro.
I can pick each one of these individually. Like, House of the Rising Sun style.
And compares it to Californication to give him an opportunity to make up a story about the guitarist saying, well, the Red Hot Chili Peppers is lazy, so why don't I go even lazier?
But I don't think they're thinking about House of the Rising Sun here. I think they're thinking more about like Californication. The guitar player in Three Doors Down, like that's what we'll call him, the guitar player in Three Doors Down, was like, okay, I got that. What if I did that on a B minor? Right?
Which, to be fair, is a funny joke on paper, but it's also, once again, Pat projecting the laziness of the song to parts of it that don't necessarily have anything to do with it. And he compares it to Mother because, although it doesn't have an arpeggiated guitar part, it does have the same 3-chord loop, and is used to show that this chord progression is very common in rock music.
It's also Mother and about 45 other songs. Mother!
I don't know how that's related to the bigger point because it doesn't have the guitar part he's talking about, and he again doesn't explain why using a common chord progression is bad. This might not have been meant as a criticism of Kryptonite and was just a tangent about something else that annoys him because he thought it sounded similar, in which case there's no reason to bring up Mother, and it again shows that what he was going to say in this video wasn't planned out very well. I found a news article about Pat's series, and they try to soften this issue with his presentation by saying his videos are unapologetically meandering, which is better than anything I could have written to describe it. An arpeggiated chord is a very common idea in music, so finding songs in the same key that both have one isn't as impactful of an observation as he thinks it is. And the criticism underlying this point's punchline is too flimsy to justify making the joke this confidently. In his final point in the section, he criticizes the way the guitar sounds, saying it's too clean and doesn't have enough reverb and distortion.
I'm gonna try to match this like shitty clean tone as best as I can. Try to keep it around like 1 to 1.5 on your amp to make it sure there's really very little presence on this. I have a little reverb on my guitar. Get rid of that, who needs it? Alright, sounds like shit. That's our guitar tone.
There's no elaboration on why this guitar sounds bad beyond just saying,
alright, sounds like shit.
As someone who doesn't have an ear for when guitar tones sound like shit, I think it would have been valuable information to hear a guitar player explain why certain guitar sounds are better than others. Even if that's not really an objective aspect of the song, you can criticize empirically. In fact, I'd argue the guitar in the intro being a comparatively clean tone to the rest of the song provides an interesting bit of contrast. Instead, Pat just assumes assumes you know what he means when he says it sounds like shit, leaving people who don't know what he means confused but willing to look past it since he's a guitar player who knows what he's talking about. So far the only idea he's tried to establish is that the people making the song are lazy, and he does this by showcasing individual musical ideas the song uses, and assumes with no elaboration that they're a larger symptom of the band's intentional laziness, even if other explanations are just as likely. That isn't a good first impression, and this black and white idea of laziness Pat has is an issue that persists throughout the video, unfortunately. He then moves on to the chorus of the song by first criticizing the guitar sound of this section for having too much distortion and not enough of the original guitar sound cutting through in a timbre he calls scumbag tone.
We got power chords happening with scumbag tone. I go crazy now, will you still call me Superman? I hate this song.
There isn't really a rebuttal to this I could make, since it's just up to personal taste and it's probably just a throwaway joke of the song's genre. I think it sounds fine if a little muddy, but if Pat has stronger feelings then I can't really argue against them. He then transitions to talking about the second part of the chorus's chord progression by firstly making a joke about them changing the chords in the second time the loop repeats. The progression is initially the same as the chorus, going B minor, then G major, then A major. After that it hits B minor again, but instead of G and A, it goes E minor to F sharp minor. Him pointing this out doesn't seem to be meant as a criticism of the song, and it'd be weird if it was, but this moment of him talking about it is a good showcase for what his mindset is throughout the video. He brings it up as if to make fun of the band for thinking that switching up the chords was a wild and impressive decision.
The second time around, if I'm alive and where will you be there? Big change.
But the only thing that makes Pat think of this innocuous detail like that is because his feelings on the song are so strong that every aspect of it needs to be a horrible and soulless production decision motivated by making money at the expense of quality. And he's so emotional making this video that he feels the urge to dunk on stuff that really does not matter to the point. It's not that deep, Pat. These two chords are not important enough to your thesis to be mentioned. I'm very glad you learned what's important enough to bring up in the next episodes, because Jesus, man. In Kryptonite, when the guitarist plays that aforementioned F sharp minor chord, he does a little 4-note line to lead us back to the B minor chord and restart the loop. Pat points out that this little bit kind of sounds like the opening riff to Crazy Train by Ozzy Osbourne, and uses this fact to make another piece of music fanfiction about the guitarist being lazy and ripping off another song by flipping it upside down.
He knows Crazy Train, so he's like, well, over an F sharp, I can do reverse Crazy Train. So there's a reverse Crazy Train.
Once again, I can't tell if this is meant as a real critique of Kryptonite, but if showing these similarities are meant as points, then this one's the weakest yet. The previous comparisons were at least understandable, since they all contain the same basic musical idea. But besides sharing two of the same notes, and them both starting on an F sharp note, this 2-second guitar line in Kryptonite sounds nothing like the riff to Crazy Train. The most consistent point in this video so far is still that certain parts of Kryptonite sound like other parts from other songs, with no exploration of how them doing that makes the song worse. At this point, the video is just watching Pat finally come to the realization that there's only 12 notes. That thing I said about not being able to tell when something Pat says is a point or not is probably worth talking about too, since it's a big problem for people who care about the quality of this video's arguments. I get that it's a running joke that Pat doesn't go into technical music theory details.
You know, I'm getting a little Beato here. I don't know about Beato.
And that the show is meant to be just some dude ranting about songs he hates instead, in an unapologetically meandering way, one might say. But leaning into that style is hindering how well he can present his arguments. It makes a lot of other things worse as well, but we'll get to those later. Because of the lack of reasoning he tells us behind these points, and from that more off-the-cuff delivery throughout the video, it's genuinely difficult to discern what's a point being made against the song's quality, and what's a throwaway joke at the song's expense. For viewers who watch the video because they want to see someone make fun of a song they also already hate, it doesn't matter that much. But for people who want to see why someone doesn't like a song they like, or more generally looking for substantive music critique, it makes the overall point he's trying to make look incredibly flimsy and not thought out at all. I would say that your arguments looking like that is bad because it gives people a bad first impression, but I can't because they look like that because they are that, so it's completely accurate. The next section is about the bass line, but he didn't want to film that segment, so he just says the bass player looks like a douche, and honestly, great bit. 10 out of 10, no notes. He then moves on to the drums, but weirdly only the drum part in the intro. He shows that the drummer was only using the snare drum for this part and only playing a pretty simple pattern. This bit in the song may be a reference to the types of drum lines you'd hear played in a marching band or in an army environment. That's a technique that can be used effectively, a la Welcome to the Black Parade, but I think that if that is what the song is going for, the army or marching band imagery is never called back to in any other part of the song, and that drum bit gets replaced pretty quickly into the song by a standard rock drum beat, completely negating whatever imagery it was trying to invoke. I think that those would be pretty useful criticisms of this drum part's inclusion in the song, but Pat instead takes a different approach by simply saying that only using the snare drum is lazy.
Let me see if I could get that down, like not being a drummer. Right, so I think I nailed it first take, but like, I don't even hear any hi-hat bullshit, so I'm pretty sure he's just doing that.
There's no other point that I can glean from this, so it really just sounds like he doesn't like this part because it's simple.
I don't need it to be yes for a song to be good. I love rock and roll, man. I love simple shit.
Oh no. Except not even that, because in the video he literally just shows that the part's only played on the snare and then just says that it's bad. There isn't even anything he says about it that implies a better point that he had but didn't bring up for some reason. He just moves on without saying anything other than,
so that stinks.
You see, Pat's forgotten a very important aspect of making a convincing argument, which is to make an argument. After that, he talks about the song's guitar solo. He first makes a big deal about the solo starting on B, the root note. He first makes a big deal that the solo starts on B, the root note of the key the song is in.
Guess what? On what note does it begin? A B, right.
I think this is another thing to show that the band is lazy, but like this is such a nothing point to bring up. It's just the chord change on the chorus all over again. It's a small thing that I probably shouldn't be reading into that much, but I think it's a subtle hint at where his head is at while making these arguments. Plus, if you don't like it because it's too pedantic, then you're watching the wrong video. He then shows that the first 3 notes of the solo sound like the riff to Breaking the Law by Judas Priest, because they're both ascending lines that start on the root note of their key.
So it starts with Breaking the Law, which is the first 3 notes of a B minor scale.
Another very simple and common idea, and compares a different part of the solo to Last Resort by Papa Roach, which frankly I just don't get at all.
And it does this big move, which is palm muted. Look out now. Which I'm not sure if this is pre or post P Roach, but I'm gonna say that there's some cross pollination there, like with Last Resort.
So at this point, I think Pat's just more excited to show you all the songs he can play on guitar than he is to analyze Kryptonite's music theory. Too bad there's no way to avoid comparisons like this. Like if there was a system in place where we organized songs into categories based on their shared elements. His real point with the solo is that it doesn't have much going on in it. It's just going up and down by 1-note intervals, except for a couple of outliers.
So it's just using the first 4 notes of a B minor scale, which is, you know, I'm getting a little Beato here.
What I'd say after noticing this is that it's a serviceable pop rock guitar solo, but it doesn't earn its place as a necessary section of the song because it doesn't really do anything that interesting with its time as the main focus. And that's great to think about, since this video assumes you've already made up your mind about the solo being bad, so Pat once again just says,
that solo stinks,
with no further commentary. Although I will say, unlike with the drum part, Pat does actually say something here that implies he has a bigger point with bringing this up. Having some statement to interpret goes a long way in letting your audience misinterpret the things you're saying. He probably does dislike the solo for being boring, but he also thinks that it being boring is self-evident, when it just sounds like he dislikes it for being simplistic when he doesn't elaborate at all.
I love rock and roll, man. I love simple shit.
Wait, no, that one doesn't count. The next section is about the song's lyrics, which is always a really interesting aspect of bad songs to discuss, and he even brings on another musician to have a better discussion about it with. His first point is that the lead singer ends the first part of the first verse before a little mini-bridge by using the line,
I watch the world float to the dark side of the moon.
But he then begins the second half of the verse after the bridge with the same line.
I watch the world float to the dark side of the moon.
This line is pretty clunky, so I totally get why the writer thinking it was good enough to use twice is funny. Pat doesn't say that that's why he points it out though, since elaborating is something this video finds difficult doing, but there are at least hypothetical reasons he could hold to think it's a bad decision. The guy he interviews compares this line reused to other musicians rhyming the same word with itself.
He repeats the line that he had already sang about Dark Side of the Moon. What do you think about that, bro?
I hate that. Paul McCartney's apologized for using shoulder twice in Hey Jude for 53 years. It's just the word shoulder.
I don't think this comparison really works, since rhyming a word with itself is something you should always avoid when writing a song, except for very rare exceptions, but reusing a line like this isn't inherently a lazy mistake, even if it contains and is surrounded by lazy lyrics. A fun example of it being used well is the song Glad You Came by The Wanted, where the last word of the lines in the pre-chorus gets reused in a different context as the beginning of the next line.
Now I'll take you by the hand you another drink. Drink it if you can. Can you spend a little time? Time is slipping away.
And if you want an example from a better song, Beyonce rhymes Minute with itself on the track Irreplaceable.
I could have another you in a minute, and in fact, he'll be here in a minute.
But it's meant to serve as a punchline rather than her just not being able to think of a rhyme for Minute. These are both good popular songs that show us that intentionally reusing lines and words isn't inherently a lazy decision. And honestly, I think Pat and the guy he's talking to knows this. The problem is that Pat's already set in his opinion that everything that went into making the song is lazy, so he says that the line being used twice is a bad decision without any explanation besides the fact that the line is in fact used twice. I'd argue that reusing the Dark Side of the Moon line was intended to subvert the meaning the line was given when it was used the first time, by following it up with a different line to give the whole thought a new emotional context, from solemn detachment to an almost playful back and forth with the person he's talking to. And no matter if the song succeeded in doing that or not, it's at least more of an explanation of intent than Pat was able to give by just saying,
Don't do Dark Side of the Moon.
And speaking of whoever the lead singer is talking about, Pat also brings up that we're never told the relationship the singer has with the person he's talking to in the song.
If I go crazy, then will you still call me Superman?
Who's you?
He brings this up to the guy he's interviewing, and he starts talking about how this mystery person ties into the Superman metaphor, and describes their relationship as them balancing out the lead singer's superhuman view of himself.
Is she Kryptonite?
She could be Kryptonite because we may be missing a comma after might. He's the person with kind of superhuman abilities. He's the person who kind of like goes, I think his thing is like a superiority complex, so he's kind of going beyond what he needs to do in his everyday life.
And in response to this, Pat says, it's not that deep, bro.
Okay, you're putting way too much into this.
Like, sure, that is funny to say, but what? The whole point of a video like this is to go deep into why a song is bad. Why are you just shooting that down to make another quip about the band being lazy? Just because the lyrics are bad doesn't mean that there was no thought process behind them at all. Plus, that was the most surface level explanation of the song's themes too, so there wasn't even anything deep for it to not be. If the song's intention was to paint the picture of a relationship where someone brings you down to earth when your ego gets the best of you and picks you up when you suffer the consequences of that overconfidence, then the person he's talking to being his girlfriend or sibling or just some dude he knows isn't necessary in terms of telling that story, and if we did know, it wouldn't really change anything about the message's clarity. It might matter to some people who prefer the songs to have more of a real narrative, and to be fair, Kryptonite definitely could use some more detail in its storytelling, but as long as what the song is going for is painting a picture of this relationship dynamic, focusing on a detail like that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, because although it is a vague aspect of the lyrics, it isn't really the clarification we need to fix the root of the problem. The final section of the video is about the big yeah the guy sings to lead into the final chorus.
Yeah!
I mean, I guess it's a good thing to cover, since it's meant to be the climax before the end of the song, but the weird thing is that Pat criticizes this part because it's easy to sing.
You know, just like Won't Get Fooled Again, you're waiting for that big scream, you know? It's like now we're just waiting for that classic Brad Arnold, yeah, this big moment of the song, which I'm pretty sure is an F sharp Beato. You know, F sharp, it's kind of high for a guy, but not really. I mean, I haven't sang all day. Let's hear me try it. Yeah! Yeah, I don't even have that high of a voice. Yeah! I'm gonna see if I can get people on Instagram that aren't singers to sing that part.
Yeah!
Yeah!
What's annoying about this is that he's almost on the right track. The biggest issue with this yeah bit is that for something clearly meant as a powerful burst of energy to lead us back to the chorus, there really isn't a lot of power or emphasis put into it from the song's production, so it just sounds kinda wimpy. I'd compare it less to a vocal run and more to something like a death metal screamo scream, albeit a lot whiter. As you just heard, Pat used Won't Get Fooled Again by The Who as an example of a song with a good scream leading to the track's final act, so let's compare that song to Kryptonite to help illustrate what I'm talking about. Won't Get Fooled Again is a better example of a rock and roll scream, but the issue isn't that what The Who did was more technically impressive, although it is simply just a better scream, but it's that the singer and the surrounding production made the scream feel more like the massive burst of power it needed to be. The scream in Kryptonite isn't bad because anyone you find on Instagram Live can imitate it. It not being powerful is just a symptom of the problem, which is that the band really didn't do much in terms of production to make it any more impactful than all the other transitions from verse to chorus. But instead of criticizing it for not doing what it's intended to do effectively, he instead emphasizes that vocally it doesn't require a lot of technical skill to wimpily scream, like it's meant to be an Ariana Grande whistle note ad-lib or something. Pat understands that this part is lame and ineffective, but the only way he can say why is to once again default to the people making the song having no talent or motivation to make good or impressive musical decisions. And that's really the main issue with this entire video. You'd think someone making fun of Kryptonite by Three Doors Down would be the easiest slam dunk, but Pat's binary view of every aspect of the song being motivationless gets in the way of all the actually interesting criticisms you could make. And him thinking that laziness is obvious enough to crack jokes at means that none of the more questionable criticisms are elaborated on at all. Kryptonite is a half-baked and unambitious song, which is close to being motivationless, but it's more that the motivation they did have was misplaced and not used to create many cohesive ideas. Pat recognized that hollowness, but his emotional disdain for the song made him misattribute it to creative apathy. All he's done here is assume that the band made the intentionally simplest musical decisions, like the guitar solo not moving around a lot or the intro only using the snare drum, out of apathy for musical creativity instead of it just being a bad decision that wasn't thought out very well. And what's annoying is that I know Pat can make a better version of this same argument. In the second episode of the series about All Summer Long by Kid Rock, he points out that the drum fill to the intro of the song sounds identical to the drum fill in the intro to Smells Like Teen Spirit.
At no point did any of them say, you know, I think I may have heard this drum intro before.
If this were Pat from the first episode, then he would have just ended the criticism at this comparison with no elaboration besides a joke about how lazy it was to steal another famous drum fill. But in here, he actually completes the thought and makes a cohesive criticism against the song, cause he then points out that in a track in which the only hook is already interpolating two songs that sound the same, Sweet Home Alabama and Werewolves of London, something simple to add in as a unique idea to this version, like a 3-beat drum fill in the intro, should at least try to sound somewhat original and interesting, but it doesn't.
All they needed to do to make something different happen out of a song that's already two songs, they could have put an original drum fill at the intro, but instead they used one of the famous fucking drum intros of all time, Smells Like Teen Spirit drum intro.
He even does another music fanfiction bit here, and it works a lot better as a joke because it isn't just an overconfident throwaway jab he makes to reinforce his preconception of the motivation behind the song. Whether that's just the issues with his presentation being fixed in later episodes or not, it shows that there's clearly some part missing to the arguments in this video. Regardless of Kryptonite genuinely being a lazy, bad song, pushing that onto every musical idea it has and not exploring why they make the whole of the track bad just doesn't provide any useful or meaningful insight. And while we're on the topic of the other episodes, I've said a few times so far that all the videos after the Kryptonite one definitely improve on a lot of these aspects. In general, Pat's criticisms are well thought out, even if some points he makes aren't that substantial, and he's much better at communicating whether something is a joke or a real criticism said in a comedic manner. And I suspect this is because he started choosing songs with a lot more blatantly bad aspects. Kryptonite's biggest flaw was that it was just underdeveloped, so there isn't much you could analyze under the lens of being affronts to good taste. But songs like All Summer Long or Hey Soul Sister by Train have so many bad decisions going into them that it's infinitely easier to consistently riff on them. All of that is still the case and much appreciated, but on occasion, usually when he chooses a song with not that many things to bring up, he makes a point that gets backed into the corner of falling into the same issues I've already talked about. Also, just for transparency, this video was supposed to look at each episode and critique them individually, but since after the first video there weren't that many terrible points, I didn't want to do that. There were still things I wanted to talk about with the other ones though, and the series as a whole, so that's what this last bit is about. For the most egregious example, let's look at a part from the 6th episode about Danny California by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, where he dips into the danger zone of of comparing the track's musical ideas with other songs. Fortunately, the things he brings up are mostly reasonable observations that serve to illustrate a good general criticism, that the song is repetitive and doesn't try to evolve past its influences. He points out the very commonly cited issue that the song has a lot of similarities to Mary Jane's Last Dance by Tom Petty, specifically that the verses have the same chord progression played in a similar way.
Talk about the obvious. I'm sure close to 100% of you know that this song is Mary Jane's Last Dance. I mean, you know that. I mean, I know that. Everybody, they know that.
He also shows that the repeated lick in the guitar solo is similar to the opening of the solo to Jimi Hendrix's Purple Haze.
You know, there's only one way to end a song that's already a song, and that's with the Purple Haze guitar solo. There's very few pentatonic show licks that you can't play. That's one of them. It's fucking Purple Haze.
Regardless of if you describe these choices as ripping off other songs or not, they are being used by Pat to illustrate that a lot of the big musical ideas in the song feel too similar to the songs they were inspired by. But this is unfortunately where the section gets derailed, as the third example for his argument is one of the biggest dark horse lawsuit level stretches I've ever seen.
And I know some of you guys are thinking, hey, you're stretching it a little bit.
See, even he agrees. He tries to say that the vocals in the verses, which are sung consistently on a B note while occasionally going down to A, are ripping off a guitar riff from People of the Sun by Rage Against the Machine, cause it also moves down from B to A in a similar rhythm.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
People of the Sun. I mean, he's ripping off a Rage guitar melody.
I get the other examples, cause those could be seen as distinct and recognizable parts of the songs the Peppers are lifting from, but the similarity here is way too general of an idea to be distinctively claimed by any song. A melody that holds on an unstable note before resolving to the root note of the key to make a simple rhythm of tension and release is probably the most basic musical idea you could have. So it's genuinely baffling to say that Danny California is ripping from this Rage song because they did it in the key of A minor first. This is just him saying that arpeggiating the same chord means that it's an overplayed idea or a ripoff all over again. These are singular, very basic ideas that don't mean the artist is lazy for using them when on their own or next to better examples, and they don't belong to another artist because they did it before in a better song. If these ideas were produced in the same way or sounded similar besides using the same notes, then it'd be a better case, but right now we're comparing a vocal line to a punk rock guitar riff, so I'd say there was some notable differences in how they sound. But also they don't even use the same notes. Danny California holds on B and moves to A, but People of the Sun starts on B and moves up to C before moving down to A while briefly hitting B again in between. It's pedantic to explain that, sure, but once again Rage did not patent the idea of resolving to the root note of the key the song is in. This was probably just Pat grasping at straws since he wanted a third example of the song ripping something off, but couldn't find another good one, and he's at least aware of how much of a stretch it is. But if you have that much trouble finding another example, then just use two examples. Speaking of which, another instance of an issue we've seen before creeping up somewhere is in his episode about Machine Gun Kelly's song Emo Girl, where this time he does the thing where he goes on a weird tangent that I can't tell if it's meant as an actual argument against the song or not. In one segment, he points out that the guest singer Willow sings one of the lyrics kind of similarly to how the Bare Naked Ladies sing one of the lines in the pre-chorus to their song 1 Week.
When I drive in the car and I say, who is this bitch? You don't understand, it's some next shit. I'm the kind of guy who laughs at a funeral. Can't understand what I mean, you soon will.
She soon will.
Won't understand, it's some next shit.
Well, can't understand what I mean, well, you soon will.
It's close enough.
I've tried to wrap my head around what the point of bringing this up could have been, since he really doesn't say anything about the similarity after showing it, but I think it is literally just him being reminded of a different thing that annoys him and feeling the urge to bring it up even if it's a weak connection and completely unrelated to the topic. I guess both of the lyrics involve telling someone that they don't understand the singer's style, and Pat does talk about his issues with the Bare Naked Ladies line after this, but the MGK lyric has enough different from the 1 Week lyric to not suffer from the same problems, so really the only thing he's saying by showcasing this comparison is that these lines sound the same. Although, like the last example, he does clarify that he knows it's a stretch, and admitted the only reason he brought it up was because it reminded him of another song he hated.
Close enough. It's not the same chords, it's pretty much the same melody, and it made me think of it.
Which I guess is a cool thing for him to acknowledge, at least. If I had realized that, I wouldn't have put it in the video, but that might just be me. And he is right, these parts are similar musically, but that's, once again, only because they use the same basic musical idea. They're both just lines that repeatedly hit the second note of the key before resolving to the... Hold on, is this the same idea being compared as the last one? And wait a minute, isn't 1 week also in a key with the root note of A?
Can't understand what you soon will. Getting born in the state of Mississippi.
Oh my god, they ripped off the Bare Naked Ladies too! I'm so sorry, Pat, I never should have doubted you. Now, I've already sufficiently beat the idea into your skull that pointing out the two songs have the same basic musical elements isn't an insightful observation by now, but unlike earlier points where they tried to be an argument or a joke and just failed, this one is transparently just that Pat was reminded of another song he doesn't like and nothing else. There is one bit where it sounds like he's saying Emo Girl made a common mistake that 1 week was infamous for making.
She soon will.
But then he doesn't elaborate at all on what MGK did wrong and just goes on a tangent about the Bare Naked Ladies lyric. Like, this isn't surprising. We know by now that sometimes the show can be unapologetically meandering, but when it's in a video that's otherwise filled with interesting discussion on the idea of authenticity in pop punk, switching focus to a non sequitur jab at the Bare Naked Ladies that adds literally nothing for a significant amount of time is so much more jarring than if it were in a video filled with weak arguments like the Kryptonite one. And more generally, if the only thing that a point adds is an opportunity to talk about something else with only a thinly veiled connection to the topic of the video, then all you have is a jarring break in the video's flow filled with no new insight or entertainment value. Beyond people who agree with you that 1 week is also a bad song, this unrelated jab doesn't further the premise of the video at all, which is to show why this MGK song is bad, or to the central theme Pat's previously established, which is that MGK is co-opting and flanderizing emo culture and pop punk tropes. If this part were in a video about 1 week, or were comparing the lines in order to make fun of a common production mistake other than just reminding you of another bad song, then it would be less of a jarring inclusion. But it doesn't do any of that, so I don't know why Pat didn't just cut this segment and save these clips for a video that they would have made more sense to be included in. And another important thing to bring up is that his video on Emo Girl is the latest video in the series currently. Apart from a few mini episodes and some podcasts I refuse to watch, this is his most recent attempt at a structured piece of music analysis. So if you thought all these issues were just a symptom of him starting out, then you would be sorely mistaken. It seems like this could be more some larger issue underneath the surface of the way these videos are presented, which is a good enough segue to zoom out of individual arguments and analyze the show as a whole. All the other things in the series I have a problem with are just points that are funny or true, but don't really add anything to whatever's being discussed, so with that out of the way, those were all the major criticisms I have with the What Makes This Song Stink series. No, wait, there is one more, but it's just a little one. In the intro to the video about Lenny Kravitz, he says that Cotton Eye Joe by Rednecks is a bad song, and I don't even need to explain why that's a terrible opinion. If that doesn't tell you this guy shouldn't be taken seriously, I don't know what will. As I've said plenty of times, I do think that as a whole, this is a good series, at least in terms of criticizing and poking fun at popularly disliked songs. But I think that the quality of the other episodes has more to do with there being some issues at the core of the show's presentation that Pat's thankfully gotten better at avoiding. The format of someone rambling about a song that gives them strong negative emotional reactions with little preparation is really good for personality-based music analysis content, but that also means that most of the show's criticisms rely heavily on surface-level details that are easy to jab at if you have any knowledge of music. That can work if all the problems with the song are obvious and easy to explain, like a lot of the songs Pat makes videos about are. But for songs like Kryptonite, any thesis you could make about why it's bad can't be reached by just pointing out things like guitar parts sounding like parts from other songs, or saying a simple riff or drum beat is bad because it's easy to perform. Like I said, the overall issue with Kryptonite was that the band didn't make an effort to do anything interesting with the tropes it uses, and the original ideas they did have aren't fleshed out very well either, or weren't made to connect with each other to make a cohesive artistic statement. And Pat recognized this soullessness, but incorrectly tries to say that it's because no effort was put into the song's creation, instead of the effort that was taken not being cohesive or thought out well as a whole. When a song is more middle of the road or is decent apart from one major issue, it requires more of an effort to illustrate these criticisms, since not everyone will already know the song's issues enough to agree with you implicitly. It also means that you're more likely to just not have anything to say about certain aspects of the music, or the only things you could think to say are not that valuable when put under scrutiny. People just looking for jokes about a thing they don't like will usually be satisfied, even if you're making fun of their favorite band, but the series is presented like it's comedic analysis, and not everything in these videos are meant to be funny. So people looking for analysis of bad music with a comedic undertone are gonna be hit hard whenever the actual criticism isn't good enough to justify those jokes made about it, or when no observation was made but a joke is said as if the people watching are just supposed to get what you mean. This isn't a personal problem I have with Pat. He's a pretty good public speaker with much more experience in music than I'll ever have. It's more of a double-edged sword with the choice to format the series in the way he has, and it's frustrating to see him use his skills and expertise to stumble into making bad criticisms, either knowingly or not, in order to justify making confusing jokes with misguided confidence. These issues are exacerbated with the Kryptonite video, mostly since it's the first experience Pat had with creating an analysis video in this format, but not all the problems with that video can be brushed off as symptoms of inexperience. Plus, those other examples are enough to show that these problems can still occur when in the right circumstances. And I'd like to reiterate the fact that he thinks that Cotton Eye Joe is bad. Pat just fell into the common pitfalls of the presentation style and analysis mindset he chose to use, and he's thankfully learned how to avoid falling into them again. But it's good to remember that his output wasn't always this high quality, and it's important to understand what the problems are so you don't accidentally say that Rage Against the Machine owns the concept of the root note again. So there you have it, my 40-minute long college thesis essay on why a YouTube comedy music series was correct incorrectly. This isn't the kind of video that I would normally make, and usually I try a little harder to make something this long, but as you could probably tell, I'm a fan of online music discussions, so it was interesting to analyze the presentation style of a series like this, and understand how, much like Kryptonite, these arguments can falter if they aren't fully fleshed out. I made a couple of jabs at Pat here and there throughout the video, but rest assured I don't actually hold any ill will towards him, although he did make me defend Machine Gun Kelly in a roundabout way, so maybe he deserves it. Regardless of the 40 minutes of content I just did, my thoughts on the series are mostly positive. I just had some mixed feelings about the show's presentation that I wanted to reconcile with you guys, but with that being said, that's the end of my ramble about what makes this song stink. So, if you want to watch the world move to the dark side of the moon, then consider liking this video. And if you can't understand what I mean, well, you soon will, but in the meantime, why don't you also subscribe? And I'll see you all in the next video.